Have you ever had that nagging feeling that what you're seeing isn't the whole picture? Like you're just watching shadows on a wall? Well, today we are diving into a powerful story all about that feeling. It's a journey from the deepest darkness into a light so bright it hurts, and it's all based on one of the most famous ideas in history. So let's get into it.
Imagine a vast underground cavern, its walls slick with damp stone. That's how it all begins. Right away, you're pulled into this dark, unsettling world. So, what is this place really?
Well, that unsettling place is the first stop on our journey, the Cave of Shadows. And you have to understand, for the people trapped inside, this isn't just some prison. No, it's the only world they have ever known, a world built on total deception.
Okay, so picture this. People who have been chained up since they were born, forced to stare at nothing but a flat stone wall. Behind them, there's a fire, and puppeteers are using it to cast shadows onto that wall. For the prisoners, those flickering silhouettes, that is reality. It's not a show. Their whole world, their beliefs, their conversations, it's all about figuring out what these illusions mean.
Now, if this whole setup is ringing a bell, that's because it should. This is a fresh take on a classic, Plato's Allegory of the Cave. It's this famous parable from his book, The Republic, and it's all about what it takes for a philosopher, or really any of us, to move from ignorance and illusion to actual truth and enlightenment.
So let's bring this home. What are the shadows in our lives right now? Well, they're those beliefs we just sort of absorb without ever really thinking about them. They're the myths our society tells us are true. They're the endless media spectacles that are designed to keep our eyes glued to the screen. They're even those little desires we chase, thinking that's what will make us happy. Yep, those are the shadows dancing on our cave walls today.
But what if one of those prisoners actually breaks free? That's what happens next, and it leads us to our second stage, a painful ascent. Because let me tell you, finding the truth is almost never easy. In fact, it's usually excruciating. And this is where we meet our hero, Erebus. When his chains finally break, his first feeling isn't relief. It's pure pain. He turns around and sees the fire, the very thing creating the shadows, and the light is so intense it stings his eyes. And for the first time, he sees the puppeteers. He realizes his entire life, his reality, was a carefully constructed lie. That is a brutal awakening. You see, this whole journey happens in stages. It's a process. First, the shackles loosen. That's that first flicker of possibility. Then, he confronts the fire and realizes he's been duped. That's followed by this horrible, steep climb up a dark tunnel, crawling toward a light he can't even understand. And then finally, he breaks through into a world so bright, so real, it's completely blinding.
So after that absolutely agonizing climb, Erebus finally reaches our third stage, the world of light. And this is the moment of revelation. The moment everything he thought he knew is just shattered into a million pieces. As his eyes slowly adjust, Erebus is just completely floored. That flat, gray ceiling of the cave, it's a vast, blue sky. Those dark, lifeless shapes he called trees. They're real, living, breathing things. And he just weeps, not because of the pain anymore, but from the overwhelming, shattering beauty of it all. This is his first real taste of truth. I mean, the contrast is just staggering. In the cave, a tree was a two-dimensional flickering silhouette on a wall. Out here, it's a living, breathing tower reaching for the sun. An empty echo in the dark is now the actual song of a bird with wings. It's the difference between a cheap knockoff and the real thing. And this is where it all clicks for Erebus. He finally gets Plato's big idea of the forms, these perfect, eternal truths that exist behind our messy reality. He's not just looking at a pretty flower anymore, he's getting a glimpse of beauty itself. He's not just seeing someone do something nice, he's starting to understand what goodness with a capital G really is. This is the absolute peak of his journey. But here's the thing. Once you've seen the light, you're faced with a really tough choice. And that brings us to our next chapter, the burden of return. So Erebus feels this pull, this compassion, to go back and free the others. But how do you think they react? They laugh at him. They mock him. His eyes, now used to the sun, can't see properly in the dark anymore, and they take that as proof that the outside world is dangerous. "Fool," they yell at him. "You've gone mad. Your so-called truth has blinded you." They think his enlightenment is just a form of insanity.
But his message isn't totally lost.
Two people, Lyra and Kale, hear something in his words that rings true. They were always a little more curious, a little more defiant. And so they're inspired. They break their own chains and decide to follow him up that same painful path. It's such a great reminder, right? That even if most people resist the truth, it'll always find the few who are actually ready to hear it.
And that tiny little spark of hope, it's about to ignite a full-blown revolution. Which brings us to our final amazing act, the triumph of truth.
Now, here comes the ultimate turning point, and it's from the last person you'd expect. Thorn, the guy who was the Shadow King, the one who defended the cave's reality the most. He escapes. He finds Erebus and confesses, "I was the puppeteer and the prisoner." He finally got it. By controlling the illusion for others, he was just as trapped as they were.
Once Thorn joins them, the whole thing just explodes. What started with 3 brave escapees turns into a great exodus. You have thousands of people, a whole river of humanity pouring out of that darkness. And they don't just wander around aimlessly. They build new societies, citadels of the soul, founded on reason and truth. And at long last, the fire in the cave is put out for good. The Age of Shadows is over.
But the story doesn't just end with them leaving the cave behind. No, they transform it. It becomes a monument, a sacred place to remind them where they came from. They go back down, not as prisoners anymore, but as pilgrims, to remember the darkness. Why? So they can forge keys from memory, to make absolutely sure that no one is ever trapped by those kinds of shadows ever again.
And so, this whole story, Erebus's journey, it really ends with a question for every single one of us. This isn't just some old story. It's a challenge. It's asking you to look at your own life, at the things you believe without question. What shadows are holding you in place? And when are you going to start your own climb toward the light?